Okay, so today's training, April 3rd, 2019, is training on negotiating for buyers and sellers. Negotiating for buyers and sellers. First, we're going to talk about when you're working as a buyer's agent, how to negotiate for buyers. Okay, so when you have a buyer who wants to make an offer on a property, one of the first things you're going to do, use your logic, but one of the first things you're going to go to do is call the listing agent and find out, ask the question, is it okay to submit an offer? Right? You could call them, is it okay to submit an offer? Right? This is going to help you to know if the property's under contract already or if they've got something working on it. They'll tell you at that point, right? The reason I'm suggesting you use these terms, these words, okay, is it okay to submit an offer, is because, in my experience, most agents will say, do you have anything working on it? Are there any offers on it, right? And oftentimes, the agent who's representing the seller doesn't want to tell you that, doesn't want to give out that personal information. It puts them in an uncomfortable position, right? If they want to disclose that to you, they will, right? So you don't want to start this relationship off with the listing agent on bad terms, right, where you're probing them for information, right? You want to start it off on good terms. That's very important that you have a good relationship with the listing agent because the listing agent does control the listing and can turn the head of the seller as to whether or not to accept your offer or another. Does that make sense? Okay. So call the listing agent. Is it okay to submit an offer? At that point, also ask the listing agent about seller preferences, right? We're going to ask them, like, what closing date do they prefer, for example? Right? We want to know what the seller preferences are. Of course, we need to know what the buyer preferences are, but seller preferences need to be in alignment with that, right? So what's the closing date you like? Is there any price flexibility? That's a nice way to ask. You know, is there any price flexibility? You can ask that to the buyer's agent. They'll tell you at that point. Maybe there was another offer or they turned down an offer recently. This is valuable for you to know as the buyer's agent, okay? And remember, when you're dealing with the listing agent, develop a relationship, okay? Think of being on good terms with the listing agent. You do not want to be a jerk to the listing agent. You want to be nice to them. This is not what, like, you're walking into JCPenney and you just buy a product for a certain price. This is a long-term negotiation where you want to be in good relations, and it all starts with that first call, okay? And then I also recommend that when you talk to the listing agent, you ask them, and then one more question, is there anything special I should know? Anything special or unusual I should know about this listing, right? And they'll tell you some weird things that can save you trouble later, right? Like, oh, the sewer line is clogged right now, or, something unusual, or, we have another offer expected on Tuesday, right? So you're just being real nice with them, asking them some basic questions about the listing. And that is going to help you to formulate a great offer. Especially in a hot market like this, you want to make sure that your offer is good and that you're on good terms with the buyer's agent.
What was the wording you used with the price?
Yeah, so is there any price flexibility? Is there any price flexibility?
Thank you.
Sometimes they'll tell you right away. I read my client, they'll say, my seller has given the last person a counteroffer of $60,000 or $600,000 or whatever the price is on the property, right? The last person offered $500,000 and my seller countered at $450,000. Wouldn't you want to know that information? Couldn't that save you a lot of money? Couldn't that save the buyer a lot of money? Yes. So it does pay to call the buyer's agent and talk to them. Text them, whatever you can do, however you can get a hold of them, okay? So after you're done talking to the buyer's agent.
Listing agent?
Yes, correct. Not buyer's agent, listing agent. After you're done talking to the listing agent, you're going to go in and review the MLS page. Make sure you have good knowledge of that. Look at the history on the MLS page. There could be some clues there, right? If they tried to sell it last year for a lower price and now they're trying to sell it this year, you might want to know that information. You can look at the tax data. Double check the records on the tax data. You could also look into the supplements on the MLS. Read through the supplements. Look at the seller's disclosure, the lead paint, any additional supplements that could be in there, so you know everything about the house. All this investigation and talking to the listing agent will save you trouble later, save you a lot of work later. So you're doing your homework in the beginning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now that you know everything you need to know about the property, we're assuming you've been to the property, you've looked at the supplements, you've talked to the agent. Now you want to offer the best terms possible. And what are the best terms possible for a buyer's agent to offer the listing agent? Right? So many people want a fast closing.
Mm-hmm.
Double check when you talk to the listing agent, you know, what closing date do they like. But most people want a faster closing generally. Some don't. Okay? But that could be good terms. They also want a high price, right? Price is going to be one of your biggest factors. So you offer as much as possible for the property. They want a large deposit generally. If you can turn a $1,000 deposit into a $2,000 deposit, do that. Submit that with the contract. That makes you look really good. Okay? Short or no inspections. If your buyer is willing and comfortable and confident and can do a shorter inspection period or no inspections, it's going to make your offer look stronger. And beware that, you don't want to encourage a buyer to do no inspections if they are not smart. If they don't know how to evaluate a house properly, they should have inspections. And you should probably have them sign an agreement that says they've had the chance to have inspections and they've chosen to waive it and they know all the potential pitfalls of doing that. Right? But when it comes to just getting an offer accepted, that's one way to do it. Okay? We also want to make sure we have a good-looking pre-qualification note, right? If your customer is buying a $400,000 house, but they're qualified to buy a $500,000 house on their pre-qualification note, do we submit a note that says they're qualified for $400,000 or they're qualified for $500,000 with that offer?
You should have them redo it for $400,000.
Many would say that. Many would say have it redone for $400,000 so the number on the pre-qual matches the offer on the house. However, what we found is that all factors being equal, if two buyers offer on a house and one submits a pre-qual for the amount of the house and another submits a pre-qual for $500,000, $100,000 more than the house is worth, the buyer who has the higher pre-qual wins. Why? Because they've proven they're more qualified, which makes the deal less likely to fall apart.
Yeah, I would do something in between that. I would be calling the bank and having them submit something with like $430,000 instead of showing that they were
I've
so.
actually had a lender say, I'm going to give you 2 pre-qualification letters, one for this amount and one for this amount, because we don't want to tip our hand that we can go higher.
Yes, that's good. A good argument I've heard many times. However, I don't agree with it.
Yeah,
I believe it's better to negotiate from a position of strength. If you're worth $1 million and you want to show the person this is a done deal pretty much. I'm worth $1 million here and the house is $500,000. The seller's going to be wooed by that and more likely to accept your offer than if you're some shaky buyer who's just barely qualified for $500,000. How do they know there's not an error and you're really only qualified for $450,000 and the bank made a mistake?
So what do you do though in the case that you're working with a lender that says we don't want to go above the purchase price of the house or something?
If you talk to the buyer and let the buyer decide.
Yeah.
The buyer should be able to make that decision. Many buyers will tell you, hey, I only want to submit a pre-qual for the offer that I'm making. I don't want to look like I'm worth more because I want to negotiate from weakness. I want to show them that I can't afford any more than this so that
they don't counter.
So they don't counter and they won't go any higher. My experience is that it's better to negotiate from strength, but use your best judgment on this.
Yeah, because I mean, what are they going to? What can the seller really do with that information? They can't go, oh, well, then we'll counter with $50,000 more. Well, your house isn't going to appraise for that. You're not. That's not going to do you any good. I mean, they may ask for a couple $1,000s back, but they could, no matter what our pre-qualification letter, it's probably going to allow for the few $1,000s that they would counter with anyway.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You want your customer to look strong.
Right. That makes sense.
If the seller is countering based on how much your customer can afford, it's not very logical. Right. That's not a logical counter. The price should be determined based on how much is the home worth.
Right.
Not how much people can afford. Right. If I walked into, JCPenney and I said, well, I can only afford $5, but I want this shirt that's $6, are they going to go down on the price for me? Probably not. You want to always negotiate from a position of strength. This is my opinion on this matter. Okay, so a good pre-qualification note, a bank note if it's cash, right? A note that shows their balance, right? You can cross out any sensitive information like their account number. If the person wasn't comfortable giving you proof of their cash, cross out the account number, just have their name and address, the name of the bank, and the amount they have available in the bank. That can be valuable when you're working with a cash buyer, right? Cash buyers should always have a pre-qualification note in that form of some sort of bank statement showing the money they have available in the bank.
So is that basically on the proof of funds things? That's just a bank statement.
Whatever the listing agent will accept.
Okay.
If they'll accept a photo screenshot of a, deposit stub,
Right.
Go with that.
Right.
You want to make sure the listing agent is comfortable with what you give them.
Okay.
I recommend a quality letterhead from a bank showing that, this buyer has this much available in cash funds, liquid funds.
Is that verifiable by like the listing agent? So if somebody is a buyer submitted that letter to me and say the date on the bank statement was a month ago because they've been shopping for houses and it was obviously a cash situation.
Yeah.
Could I call the bank and verify that the money still exists there after
With your customer's permission. Your customer would probably have to call the bank first and say, my real estate agent Corey is going to call about my bank account. Could you please make sure you give him the information?
So with the buyer's permission and I'm the
Right.
seller's agent, okay.
Yeah. Well, if you're the seller's agent
Yeah.
now? Oh, no, probably the seller's agent. Yeah, the seller's agent would also have to have the buyer's permission, right? But if you were the buyer's agent, you might want to call too and verify it.
So if you were the seller's agent in that instance and they're presenting an offer with a bank statement of cash a month ago, would you say, well, that's great. Would you go ahead and update that for today?
I usually think it's okay if it's in within 60 or 90 days.
Okay.
Otherwise I want them to get something newer. Generally, I accept a bank statement.
Okay.
That's within a reasonable amount of time.
And some banks won't even give you a statement. They will actually give you a letter on letterhead saying, this customer has this account with this bank with this balance in it, and it'll be signed by like the bank president or somebody.
Okay? So cash is going to be your best option when you're dealing with making an offer on a property. If a buyer can offer cash, that's going to be best. Next best is generally going to be conventional, right? And then comes FHA, VA, all those others that could potentially have appraisal issues, right? They're a little slower to go through sometimes. The worst possible offer that you could make is generally a contingent offer. The contingent on having a house for sale and not even having it under contract. That doesn't look good in an offer. But if you're contingent and this buyer has a house that's under contract and made it through inspections, well, then that looks pretty good, and that type of contingent offer is usually pretty attractive. Okay, so you want to keep aware of that. And on the contingency offer, there's a little checkbox you check. That one says that we're under contract, and the other checkbox says we've made it through inspections. Ideally, you're checking both boxes because you've made it through inspections, and then attaching that to the offer so that the seller can see that you are qualified, that you've made it through the inspections, and that contingent offer is a pretty sure thing, maybe aside from the appraisal, which might not have happened yet, right? But it's your job from that point to keep the listing agent updated if there's any changes or problems with that contingent contract. Okay? And now you want to make sure that you submit this contract, generally electronically. You can use .loop or email, attach it as a PDF in .loop if using .loop, and make sure they got it. You don't want to just send it and assume they got it. Get a response. Right at the bottom of the email, please respond. Text them. Say, did you get the offer? Right? Send a message through .loop. Please confirm when you got this offer, because don't assume they just got it until you get a confirmation of them that they have received the offer from the listing agent. Does that make sense? Okay? You want to make sure that's in, because it's a sensitive time-sensitive information. It expires usually. You put an expiration date on it when you make that offer generally. And I recommend generally about 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, depending on what your client's willing to do. So, you can put an expiration date on it. Okay? Any questions about negotiating for buyers? Okay, is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are the tools for negotiating for buyers, and this will be recorded in case you want to watch this video again. Okay, now, moving on, we're going to go to sellers. When you're working for a seller, how to deal with offers. And Corey's been working on this, and Jason's been working on this recently. So, number one, you're going to receive an offer. Generally, it'll come through your email. The agent may contact you in advance and ask you questions if they know what they're doing, right? But you're going to get that offer in your email or .loop or DocuSign. First thing you're going to do is review that contract for completion, right? You don't want to go presenting the offer to your client if it's not a valid offer, if it's not completed, if it hasn't been signed by the buyer, if the buyer missed a signature, if the buyer's agent didn't sign it, right? It's an incomplete contract. Even if you submit it to your seller and they sign it, it's still incomplete until you get that information on it. So you don't want to go submitting incomplete contracts to your seller, generally speaking. So at that point, you're going to review it. If you see a problem, get it back to the buyer's agent and say, fix this problem, right? Or if you want to be really proactive, you could fix the problem for the agent, right? By rewriting the whole contract, basically. So say you get a 16-page contract and the buyer and the agent forgot to fill in financials, right? You could just look at that contract, hold it to one side, and fill out a whole new one, totally correct, and then share that back with the buyer's agent. Say, just go ahead and sign this. I just filled this out for you. It's the way it should be, right? Because you could be dealing with an inexperienced agent who doesn't know how to fill out a contract. You tell them to fill it out properly, and you just go back and forth, right? So you fill it out, you send it to them, and you tell them, go ahead, have your buyer sign it, right? You make sure you put the right expiration date on it. Stretch that expiration date out if you need to. So when they sign it, you still have time to then give it to your seller. Does that make sense? That's one option, okay? Now, you want to also make sure that, in this process that you have all addenda, right? I think that's on one page of the contract, it talks about all the different papers that are associated with this contract. Make sure you have all those addenda, and those are all signed by everybody with all signatures, and that they're fully complete. Okay? Does that make sense? Now once you've reviewed everything, you want to, and you know what the offer is, and it all looks good, you want to make sure that you prepare an offer summary sheet. Okay? That's a form you all have. It's basically a one-page form that lets the seller know, seller is your client, lets them know all the details of the contract on one easy page, right? Don't send them the 16-page contract yet. Ask them if they want it. If they want it, send it to them. But at this point, it's best just to send them that one page to look at. Sometimes I screenshot it with a cell phone and text it to the customer, right? Maybe email it to them also. And then wait till they've looked at it and they have it handy, and then you have a copy and you call them and you tell them, here's all the details. How do you feel about this? Here's the closing date, here's the price, here's what you'll net at closing. Does this look good to you? Are you okay with these terms? Right? And they'll tell you at that point, no, I don't like this closing date. I want to counter at this price, whatever it might be. Right? At that point, you can call the buyer's agent and you can say, these are the terms that we're countering. You do it verbally if you want over the phone. How do you feel about that? If they say yes at that point, here's another option you could do. Take the contract, rewrite it, right? Start with a fresh contract or clear the signatures in .loop, use the old one, right? Which makes it a little easier. Fill it all in the way everybody's just agreed to, that 16-page contract. No counter offers, nothing like that. Just one 16-page contract. Fill it all in real nice. And then send it to your seller to sign first, right? This is a little bit aggressive, what I'm going to teach you here. Send it to your seller to sign first, and make sure there's an expiration date on it of, say, midnight tonight, right? Have your seller sign it. Then after your seller signs it, send it back to the buyer's agent and say, these are the terms we agreed upon as far as I can tell. The seller has signed it. This offer expires at 6 p.m. tonight or 12 p.m. tonight. Give them till midnight, right? And if they sign by midnight, you have a deal on the terms you all agreed upon. Right? If they don't sign by midnight, keep it on the market. Your seller will find somebody else, or you can still negotiate the next day. Do the same thing the next night.
Was the aggressive part of that having your seller sign before you send it back, or what was the aggressive part?
The aggressive part is only giving them till midnight.
Okay, gotcha.
And filling it out yourself, so you don't have to wait for them to fill it out.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this way you get the job done quick. Right? Find all the terms agreeable. Many times people, what they want to do, buyer's agents or in general, they'll want to do a counteroffer. Okay, well, you don't like our terms, let's do a counteroffer. And then you end up having attachments to the 16-page contract, which becomes very confusing. And oftentimes you'll have a seller say, why am I signing the 16-page contract with the wrong dates on it? And you try to explain, well, you don't have to sign the last page and you're going to sign this counteroffer, which overrides things. And it's hard to explain. And it makes it tricky to find the right details later.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend you always try to clear up that 16-page contract, get everybody's terms on that contract, and do that, right? Does that make sense?
I remember this from last meeting. That's why I did that because they asked me to write a counter, so I just wrote a whole new contract. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Some agents do get mad when you do that, though.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make sense because it seems like they're trying to keep from having to go back and sign the same documents. But guess what? They're going to have everybody sign the counteroffer anyway.
Right.
So it's not saving or it's not causing them any more time.
it's like more
And
initials.
it does seem to be way easier
Yeah,
to look at
it's-
one document and know all
Oh,
your
yeah.
terms.
Absolutely. But yeah, I've had a listing agent say, well, that's just stupid. Why am I doing that? Just sign the damn counteroffer. No, I'm doing this.
Right. Yeah.
I blamed it on Dan, but they were good.
I did
with it.
too. Because my broker likes to have a fresh contract. He likes to have it all
Blame
clean.
me. It's best for the customer that we keep things simple for them.
Right.
Right? There's an old acronym, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. That's what we're trying to do here. We don't need a bunch of extra paperwork flying around and more talk and to talk to the seller about why they're signing extra paperwork. Just get it done on one contract whenever you can, right? Now, if there's changes to the contract, you have another option you could do too, right? Say they send a contract to you and there's just one minor detail and it's the seller's name is spelled incorrectly, right? You could have everybody sign that contract and then write an amendment afterwards and have everybody sign the amendment, right? But say it's another issue where the buyer's agent has submitted a contract to you as the listing agent and they're asking for 15 days inspection and you're saying, no, we'll only do 10, right? Do you write a whole new contract because of that, right? Here's another option, right? Let me tell you, the first one I just gave you is better, right? Make your own new contract, just redo it all, fix it up, right? But say that's complicated because they sent you a flat copy or something like that and the person is getting handwritten signatures from the buyer and it's going to take forever to go through all that again. You could go into that contract and add in the page where you add additional forms, check a box and add a form called an addendum, right? And then have the buyer initial that area. Put the buyer's initials in that area on the contract so that the buyer has to initial that they understand there's been an addendum attached here. So this is another time they're signing it after they've already signed it, right?
Where are they putting their initials in?
Next to the spot where you check the box and say addendum is an added document to the contract. I think it's on page 3 or 4 of the contract, right? The additional forms, is it 3? Right. So, and then what you're going to do is create that addenda saying the inspection has been changed from 15 days to 10 days. Have the seller sign it and then send it to the buyer and have the buyer sign it. And have the buyer sign that and have it fully completed before you give the buyer back a copy of the fully completed contract. Does that make sense? Because if you give the buyer back a fully completed contract before they sign that addenda, they could say, we changed our mind, it's 15 days, it's on paper, right? So you've always got to be aware of when people sign things, because if you seal in the wrong date, you could be in trouble and do your customer a disservice. Does that make sense? So the best and cleanest way to do it is to get all the terms on one contract and then have that one contract completed, right? And then if there are changes in the future, you write amendments and have the amendment signed as appropriate, right? But be careful, be wary. You don't want to sign a contract with the wrong date on a verbal agreement that the buyer is going to sign an amendment later. Because if they don't want to sign that amendment, you're in trouble, right? So that's going to be very important. So rewrite the entire contract. Now, generally speaking, here's a general principle you want to remember. Generally speaking, and I've given you one exception to that with that midnight, have the offer sent out due by midnight. But generally speaking, have the buyer sign prior to seller. That's traditionally the way it works. The reason being, when your seller signs, it's a done deal. You want it to be a done deal, right? As the listing agent, you don't want to lead your seller on and have them sign something and then say, well, the buyer's agent didn't want to sign this part, so it's all over. You just wasted a lot of time then and led your seller on. So generally speaking, have the buyer sign prior to seller, have the buyer's agent sign. Right? And then have the seller sign. You be the last one to sign, generally speaking, as the listing agent. the last one to sign. Your signature will go on page 13. And the reason for that is you want to finalize everything. You want to look it all over, make sure it's all accurate, and then sign it, right? Because you're representing the seller. You want to make sure it's valid, okay?
And that would only be different is if you have countered by rewriting the contract and sending the seller signature with that contract to the buyer with an expiration date.
Right.
But at that time, you're not signing it as the seller's
Right.
agent. You're going to
Exactly.
wait till they both sign it, and then it comes back, and
Yeah,
that'll be the last
exactly.
one.
Check it
So
over once
still,
more.
you will, no matter what situation, you will be the last one signing.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing you always want to remember, never agree verbally that you have a deal. If an agent ever asks you, do we have a deal? No, the answer is no. We don't have a deal until I have signatures.
Mhm.
Because when you're representing the seller and another offer comes in the midst of negotiations,
Mhm.
you need to be free to get
Right.
your seller that higher offer if it comes in. So once everything's signed, yes, we have a deal. But until everything's signed, we don't have a deal. I'm sorry. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
Right? So never commit verbally to anyone. Right? You can say it looks good. You can give them some feedback.
Well, you're not authorized to confirm the offer verbally.
Right.
I mean, you're not. That's
Yeah.
that's not your place.
That
in
may be a
this-
breach of your duties
Exactly.
to be giving confirmations before your seller is signed.
Right.
So I recommend you do not. Okay? So now, when you have multiple offers, what do? Right? Don't rush. Don't rush. Take your time. You could lose somebody. That's true. Yes. Some people are in a rush as buyers. But if you have multiple offers, that means that another one might come in. It's a good sign. So don't rush. Generally, the best way to deal with this is to send a message back to all the agents who made the offer and say the offers were all made on Monday or around that time and say, we have a multiple offer situation. We're requesting that all offers are submitted by 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Give them a couple of days. Give a couple of days for a few more showings to happen, potentially. Right? Get the permission of your client to do all this, of course. Suggest this to your client, but if they want to accept the first offer that comes in, they certainly have that right, of course. But I would encourage them to take their time. Let everybody have another chance to submit their final and best, okay? Now, what we've been seeing lately in the market is also something called an escalation clause. You'll get one offer from an agent who really wants the deal, and they submit this form. I don't think it's a standard MLS form that I see very often, but it's called an escalation clause. And it basically says, if you have another offer that's higher than ours, we'll go up to this predetermined amount to match that offer. Right? So if they say they're offering $400 for the house, and they know they really want it, and they say, if you have another offer that goes higher than us, we'll go up to $420.
That doesn't seem like a benefit for a buyer's agent. It just seems like problems.
Yeah, I mean, I almost did one like that for Kenny, but at the same time, it's like, are they obligated? I mean, do they have to prove that they had another offer? I mean, they would need to prove to me
And
that they
then
had
what if they're like,
another
"Oh,
offer.
These people have more money. We'll just hold firm at our price, like the sellers,
Right. Yeah,
Just hold firm at our price because they're going to have to. We'll make them come up because they really want the house. I
right.
don't know.
This is
I think that's
a common form we're seeing. When you're a
Yeah.
listing agent and you receive an escalation clause along with an offer, I recommend you still respond the same way I just told you. Submit your highest and best on the normal 16-page contract, no escalation clauses. I want it by Wednesday at 5 p.m.
Right.
End of story.
right.
Right? Because it's not fair. If you go back to one buyer specifically because they had that escalation clause, and you give them this inside information that, hey, this other contract went up to this, and we're going to go for this. We're going to go up to $415 for you now. You need to write that contract. Then, what about the other people who didn't have that inside information or didn't know
Right.
how to make an escalation clause? Maybe they
Right.
want to offer more too.
Right.
What do you do then? Right? So you just say, hey, we don't deal with escalation clauses here. Submit your highest and best by Wednesday at 5 p.m.
Mhm.
Right? If you want to put 420 in, I recommend you do.
Because you could then go back to that person that offered 415 and say, we have multiple offers, submit your highest and best, and then you got two people trying to submit their highest and best, and that could actually wind up getting more money.
Yeah, and keep your word. Be loyal, right, to the people, and do what your seller wants. Really, you're under obligation to do what your seller wants. I advise your seller to do these things and then follow their orders. right? So on Wednesday comes, the seller has a choice of which offer he wants to accept. Maybe he doesn't like any of them because they all have bad terms. Right? Could happen.
Can I flip this around? Now you're the
Sure.
buyer's agent. So do you see any advantage as a buyer's agent to trying to submit an escalation clause in a hot market where somebody might be getting multiple offers?
Yes.
I think if you have somebody that is doing a conventional and you have an escalation clause with it and the other higher offer is a FHA, then yeah, they would much rather go with your offer. So I mean, I think it would help in that situation.
I have a question to expand on that, because I had this situation come up a couple of weeks ago. I have some buyers, found a piece of land, fell in love with it, wanted to make an offer. It was already under contract. They were still in the inspection period.
Mm-hmm.
My clients came back to me and said, we will go 10,000 over list price if we can get that other contract canceled. We want this property. And I had spoken to the listing agent. She said, this is cash. It's vacant land. There's nothing on it. It's a cash deal.
What's your question?
My question was, in that situation, because after I went back to my clients and said, this is really a done deal. This property is really not available at this point. They said, what if we up our offer even more? You can't do that, correct?
The seller, from what you're telling me, the seller of that property is under legal obligation to sell it to a buyer already.
Correct. So I'm right in telling my clients
It's
you
not
don't have a
available.
chance.
It's no longer available.
That's
at that
right.
point.
That's what I told
I think the only thing you can do for your client there is just say, hey, I let the agent know that if this falls through, to call us.
I'm gonna
Right.
have to disagree.
That's all you
Yeah,
can do.
no, there's nothing we can do about
Yeah,
that.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, this happens all the time. A buyer likes a property, it's already under contract. If you walked into Macy's and they had a shirt and it said sold on it, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to try to negotiate with the cashier and say, hey, could you ditch those people?
Hang on a second.
It's already
I've
been
had
paid for.
clients do that though.
What did
I
you
just
do for
read
us?
this in the MLS rules, and I think it's still required that, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I think it's still required that seller's agent, if they're in escrow period or whatever, it's still required that they present that to their client.
Did you write a written offer?
No, we did not.
All right. So
We did not
if you
get
wanted to do, the best thing you could do is write a written offer and say, here's our backup offer.
Right.
That's it. That's all you can do.
And then let them decide whatever legality they're under or how far into the deal they are. They can.
Yeah, and if
They
something goes
sign.
wrong with buyer number one,
Mm-hmm.
they'll say, hey, buyer number two is already signed on paper here.
Right.
But
Right.
also, couldn't she push the selling agent too to say, did you present this to your client? Because the selling agent might say, no, they've already accepted this. It's a done deal. Well, no, that's not correct. It's your responsibility and hers as a buyer's agent to make sure that this offer gets to the
right.
Are
I
you
mean,
sure
you
that's right?
Go ahead.
I mean, wouldn't it be once they've accepted an offer,
Nope.
you stop giving them offers?
all the way up until it's closed. You're required to present
Okay.
the offer to the seller.
So
Okay, I didn't realize
most
that.
agents who are doing their due diligence are going to present every offer to the seller. If they're representing a seller, they present everything that comes in. That's what I recommend you do.
Right.
Present everything. Unless your person tells you, don't present me any offers that come in below 20,000 or something. Get that in writing,
Right.
right? Then don't present those offers, right? Get it in writing from them first. You don't want to see those offers. But in this case, submit the backup offer, get it in writing, get a high pre-qual. Use all these methods I told you for working as a buyer's agent. Cash, fast close, pre-qualification note, no inspections, whatever it is, and submit that offer in writing. That's the best you can do.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Any
I knew
questions?
there was no way they were probably going to get this because it was already a cash on the table offer.
Yeah.
But if you didn't
So-
put it in writing, that negates their obligation to present it to
That's
their
true.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
That's
But
true.
at that point, they
Yeah.
can't cancel that other offer.
What
Go ahead.
happened? I don't know if this is valid or not to talk about, but what happened with Garfield when the one up in Smithville? Because when you were the buyer's agent for your clients on Garfield, Aspen, and they had you presented an offer and they already had a contract, or they were just at the beginning. They weren't in the inspection period.
Right.
They had
Yeah,
to
sometimes you're at a
had
close
to
call
accept
situation where you're making an offer on a property. This happened to me recently. I showed the people the property, and I knew they really liked it. So immediately I called the seller's agent, and I said, "Hey, is it okay to submit an offer?" And he said, "We're in negotiations with somebody right now,
Mhm.
and it looks like it's a done deal."
Right.
But he didn't have anything signed yet. So it wasn't a done deal.
Right.
And he said, I gave him a verbal agreement. And I said, well, what if we submit a better offer? And this listing agent basically said, well, that's okay. Go ahead and we'll let the seller decide.
Mhm.
Right? So they let the seller decide and we ended up winning.
Right.
But once the papers have been signed, it's too late.
Right.
So that's why I say always call right away on a listing that
Right.
somebody's interested in. Right? And if the listing agent says no, we already got a contract, just tell the buyer, sorry. If you want to come in right up a backup, you can, but the chances of you actually getting that property now are very slim.
Right.
Because it looks like it's a good deal. If it is, you
Right.
could ask the buyer's agent, is there any chance this deal could fall through?
Mhm.
And if they say no, it looks solid, well then move on.
Which is what I did. So,
Yeah. So that's all you can do. Any other questions about negotiating for buyers or sellers? Okay. All right. Well, I hope this helps. And then next time you get a buyer or seller, you will feel confident that you are the best choice for a buyer or seller agent for them because you know what to do. You understand how to negotiate on their behalf. Most buyers and sellers do not know these things. And therefore, hiring you would be a good choice. Wouldn't you agree? All right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching.
Absolutely.